Hello, everyone, and welcome to the TNT Show. I'm John Drummond, and I'm your host for the next 60 minutes. Again, thanks for joining us on India Live. This is our 146th show. And thanks to you, the India Live continues to add more shows. In fact, we might hear news of another show being added to the portfolio tonight. And as always, the channel needs your support. So please do what you can to help when you see any of the requests for funding. Well, it's been another great day for British democracy. It seems that the Scottish Government has been spending money in precisely the same way as other governments do in the UK and indeed throughout the world. This is a scandal, according to the media in Scotland, and needs to stop. The UK government, of course, may continue wasting money as always. Tonight we are talking to Savan Qadir. Savan is a journalist and activist, a former asylum seeker and project manager at Refugees for Justice and a research assistant at UNESCO. He writes about politics, mainly focusing on social justice and immigration policy. Now there, immigration policy, there's a subject which I suspect we could debate all night and every night, simply to try and make some sense out of it. So we're looking forward to that discussion tonight. Well, you know, the TNT show is live. What you're seeing is actually as it happens, and it's free. So no license, no problem. And we'll be taking your questions live. So if you want to ask a question, you'll see the details on the screen. Now, to our special guest. Hello, Savan. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
Hi, John. Good evening, everyone who's watching. Thank you very much, John, for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you and be with you in the show.
Well, it's our pleasure. Tell us a little bit about your background, Savan, so people can know where you're coming from and what your a better idea of your background.
Yeah, of course. So I came from Iraq and I came to the UK via those many difficult routes. I came in the back in a lorry, actually, and I claimed asylum, and then I had to experience all the difficulties in immigration system as like many other asylum seekers and refugees are facing nowadays. And I feel like I'm a bit lucky now because at the time I thought nothing worse can happen, and I'm facing the most difficult challenges in my life. But by contrast, I see today's immigration system and the rhetoric around migration and people seeking sanctuary is far worse than it was uh, my time when I claimed asylum. And yeah, and I came. The first place I came was Scotland, and made my home in Scotland, and I call Scotland's my home. And as you said in the introduction, I don't need to go back to what I do for living by. Yeah, I'm passionate about social justice and focusing, changing the narrative around migration, and telling the truth and sharing the real stories, not the stories you hear from uh, those right wing medias, but actually the story that we hold, and we are the owner and the author of those stories. So yeah, I'm glad to have this opportunity to share those stories and of course talk a little bit about politics as well.
Yes, let's do that. But first of all, remind us when you actually made that traumatic journey from Iraq.
Yes, well, uh, it was a very difficult journey. It's never easy to leave your country, live out the journey, but you have to leave everything behind. You have to leave your family, you have to leave your friend, you have to leave your childhood memories, the streets that you used to walk, and the food that you used to eat, and the music you used to listen. And you're gonna leave all of this behind, and you're gonna go to the unknown destination. You don't know either gonna make it. You don't know how that environment would be. What you know, but the only thing you know, uh, it might be safer than the place that you're living in. and and this is what actually motivates so many people to leave their countries. And uh, for me, it was the same for me as well. I was seeking for a better life and safer life uh, than the place I was born.
And when was this?
It was around 2015, 14, 15.
Yeah. And things have changed a lot since then. I mean, I know you had a difficult time, but I guess when you look at the situation now and you look at asylum seekers, I suspect you probably think, gracious, I had it really hard, but these folks are having it much harder.
Yes, I mean, I came at a time when I guess the hostile environment was put in place in practice, and I think the architect of that hostile environment was Theresa May. And as you see now, Theresa May is now advocating for, uh, more prevention and more protection for a victim of human trafficking. She actually criticized the cruelty of the illegal migration bill. So imagine the architect of hostile environment now criticizing the illegal migration bill. So that should say something about how far this government uh, Gunnan wants to go. So yeah, absolutely. I feel like I'm the lucky one. I'm the lucky ones that
Yeah.
I didn't experience what the people in asylum system nowadays they're facing.
What do you think when you see people being loaded onto barges? These are
Uh,
people who have not been found guilty of anything. These are people who came here as they were looking for help.
I think this all go back to history, isn't it? So that all started from 1970 and 1971. You know, uh, on Paulo, or what's his name, the Bloody River, the something like
Or
that.
rivers of blood. Yeah.
Rivers of blood. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah. So when he was desperate, when he was so desperate, and the conservative actually didn't have anything to win over, and one of the tools they used was, and they stole from the actually from 1930s, the Germany, that they used migrants as a scapegoat and put all the failure and the blame for all their failures onto migrants, because they know migrants don't have the voice and
Yeah.
don't have the platform, and so they found a scapegoat. So I feel like it all started, and that he goes that history, and then loosened out a little bit between 90s and 2000, and then when the conservative took over, and the right wing ideology, uh, the right wing ideology took over all humanity, and of course, and the barges are one of the things that they're trying to deter people in a way to come to the UK, and they're so clear about it. They're so
Mm.
open about it. Say we want to make UK unattractive, and whatever that unattractive word means, and how they do it, they don't care. The end goal is to make it attractive. So the barges is to me feel like a prison. It's putting people, innocent people, literally in prison-like condition
Mm.
for the guilt of running away from war and persecution,
Yeah.
and that's the only guilt they have. And I really hate the words when I hear from people saying, well, they should have stayed in France as well, because France is 1951 refugee convention signatory, just like the UK. So if everyone claim asylum in France, so UK just can back off from the signatory and say we don't want to do anything about it, which I think this is the whole plan. They want to do that eventually, but uh, UK also has the responsibility. If you go back to 300 years of colonial history, and looting countries, and conquer and divide, if I may say so,
Mm.
including my country, Kurdistan, in 1990 and 1920. All of these things happen, and we cannot just say, well, we've done this in the past and we have nothing to do with present. Well, your past action actually has consequences, and of course France has bear and share responsibility of what happened in the historic context, but UK too. Why should we be so different and say UK the only country that you shouldn't come and claim asylum?
Yeah. It's. I mean, it's short-sighted. We could talk about the short-sightedness, the economic short-sightedness for a second, but I want to go back and just touch upon Enoch Powell, the infamous rivers of blood. Because underneath all of that was a terrible degree of cynicism, which I think you were alluding to. I mean, for example, I only learned recently that the Tory health minister actually went to the West Indies to try and encourage people from the West Indies to come and support the British NHS, because they didn't have enough nurses, didn't have enough doctors, didn't have enough people to look after patients. And that person who made that trip was Enoch Powell. And yet, scarcely 2 years or 3 years later, he was busy telling people that these people who were coming from the West Indies and elsewhere were a drain on society.
I think, yeah, it's a really, really good. Thank you for for mentioning that, because I also wanted to say the people in power, Suella Braverman, Lee Anderson, Rishi Sunak, they're not cruel. If they're powerless, if they're not in a position of power, you might actually go out and have a beer in a back garden with them. Of course, you don't do, and I won't do now, but you would definitely do. I think it's the institution, it's the position of power, because look at the shift. Theresa May, Priti Patel, and all others that came, they actually, when they are leaving those position of power, the chair, uh, when they're not responsible to dealing with, they are actually a compassionate people in somewhat. So I feel like it's the I don't know if it is, I don't understand it yet. Um, if it is the love to be in power, and you're willing to disregard your values, your principles, your morality, and put it aside and say, no, I love power, I choose power over morality, ethics, and the principle of humanity, and all of these things you put aside for power. I don't know if that's the case, but I feel like it is the case, because I've seen numerous of people, numerous um home secretaries, when they leave the position of power, they are somewhat much more
Yeah,
humane.
yeah,
And I think it's a desperation. It's like you said about power. He did that literally because I don't think he had any power to win at that time. So he needed a scapegoat.
yeah, he needs a scapegoat. I mean, I think Lord Avon put it very well. He said that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I mean, power is corrupting. It's very, very difficult to be in a position over other people and still manage not to behave very oddly in relation to how you were before and how you became afterwards. It's got something to do with, as you say, the institution, which is why, of course, you need, if you're going to have a functioning democracy, you need strong institutions that keep the politicians in some sort of environment where they do not pander to the lowest common denominator, and where they do not do or say things that prejudice people in order to remain in power. And usually that's a constitution. And of course, the UK doesn't have a constitution worthy of the name, which means that its institutions are very easily corrupted. And I agree with you too. I don't think that politicians, by and large, are evil people. I think they behave badly sometimes, and sometimes very often, in order to retain the position of power that they get to. But having said that, it's not a job that I would like to have, uh, because at some stage, at some way or shape or fashion, they must feel responsible. And it must be terribly frustrating to feel responsible and not be able to do the things that need to be done, and then decide, well, I can't do anything, so I'll just try and retain power for a little bit longer. I mean, that just sounds desperate. I mean, if I was to ask you to take a job like that, you would say, get lost. I mean, why would I want to be corrupted?
Definitely not. And for that, even even the concept of heaven, having a permanent job, like having being a politician and wanting to be permanent in a position, I think is depressing in a way. Just like even Christopher Hitchens say, like, imagine to be in heaven forever. That sounds like depressing. You're forever. You don't die. You don't sleep, and you don't do anything. You have to be there, even if it is so fun to be in somewhere for so long. I think it's depressing. But one thing I do like, I want to be a politician. I want to do things. I want to be there. I think the problem you mentioned about the constitution, it's a great one, and the other problem I would say is a proportional representation. I think when we have two political party that actually it's almost inevitable. Either you get Labour, either you get the Tories. They get more comfortable because they get a supermajority, and they don't. I mean, they don't need other votes. They don't need to convince everyone. But in proportional representation, every vote matters. And I think one way to change the public discourse around migration is to give in migrants the right to vote, which in Scotland that's in place. So that's empowering and giving and make them be considered in a political debate because they have votes and they can change things. And I think that should have happened in the UK. I'm just talking about how the world it should be. I'm moving away from how the world is right now, but I think these are the things we could do to change the public discourse.
I think the public discourse needs to change. I can't say I'm terribly optimistic, because when I look around and I think, well, we've got enough broadcast channels, we probably have enough other media outlets, and yet when I look at the quality, it's hard not to believe that the quality has actually decreased over the last few years. I mean, I can't even think of one single journalist that I could say to you, oh, Savan, you really need to read so and so, because all the people that I may have recommended to you, say 5, 10 years ago, they're not around anymore. They left, they got dispirited, they felt they were being manipulated. And when I look at the situation now, if anything, it's gotten worse. There's a sense, I think, increasingly, that when you look at the opinion polls, people are saying, I want to get rid of the Tories. And I do intend to vote for Labour in a UK election, they will say, particularly in England, less so in Wales and Scotland, of course, because I want to get rid of the Tories. But I don't detect enthusiasm. I don't see this great wave of energy of people saying, oh, I want to get out there and hoist Keir Starmer on my shoulders and rush through the streets saying, vote for him. Quite the opposite. It's like, he's all there is, so we might as well take a chance on him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people vote against the Tories, so they're not voting for parties. They're voting against the Tories, whoever that might be, whether Labour, Lib Dem, whoever got the chance to win and to put out the Tories. I mean, people would choose that, and I feel like this is what you get if you don't have proportional representation, right? So you either have to choose between the two, and the Labour Party actually have upper hand on the public, I shall say, because it says, well, if you're not happy with what I do, then you get the Tories. So you choose. I'm not going to do anything you say because I don't have to do it, because at the end of the day, you either choose the Tories or me. And it's like, I don't know. I don't think it is the proper democracy that we should be advocating for, and I think it's a long outdated system.
Yeah, well, it's outdated, but it's very odd too that the Labour Party doesn't not only espouse proportional representation, but promote it and say to people, look, if we're elected, one of the positive things we're going to do, and we can guarantee you this, is that we'll change the electoral system and we'll make it proportional. The effect that would have, if it had been implemented, say, 30 years ago, we'd only have had the Tories in power once or twice over that period, had there been proportional representation. And yet, despite that obvious advantage, I hear no one in the Labour Party saying, we demand proportional representation. And it seems to be illogical.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think what I believe and why I observe is the Labour Party do not want to talk about big changes. And I think they don't want to risk it. They are in a good position right now. And I'm sure whatever change they talk about, the Tory would use against them. And they don't want to risk it. They don't want to have that gamble. In principle, they might agree with it because it's advantage for them. Who wouldn't want something that is advantage for them? And I think we might see, I don't know, I'm just predicting hypothetically, they might come into a power and we might see that debate come back, because before I think before they were 20 points ahead. When they were narrow, and I've heard some backbenchers, they were talking about proportional representation, but it wasn't front bench, or it was never big enough to become part of their manifesto to be a big campaign about it. But I think that discussion will definitely come back because the system is not working.
Well, it's very much broken, and it seems to be that be one of the essential things that we'd want to do in order to fix part of the breakage. But I suspect there's a larger problem too, which is about the way that it's. I mean, essentially, what a constitution is, it tells people inside and outside the state, this is what we stand. This as a state, this is what we stand for, and also this is what we will not stand for. And it seems to me if you haven't been open with yourself as a state, as a people, it's very difficult for folks inside and outside to figure out what the heck is going on. Because it just feels terribly opportunistic. In other words, here are my principles. If you don't like them, I can change them. And it sort of encourages cynicism at a very time when we want, I suspect, all of us want the truth, accuracy, and ethical behaviour. And so to pander to cynicism strikes me as a very inappropriate thing to do at this time. And it's difficult. I can't quite see. Do you have any thoughts on? I mean, for example, if there's an election next year for a general election, and what do you, looking ahead now, if you had to forecast the result of that election in terms of the number of seats that Labour might win by, what would you speculate?
I think Labour would. My speculation would be Labour will win, but by very small majority, and I think they would need SNP, they would need Lib Dem as well to get that supermajority. I know they ruled that out now, but there will be a time they will come back and they would need that. I don't think Labour would win, just holding themselves, not proposing anything, just attacking the Tories. Then people will say, well, what's your plan then? We know the Tories are terrible. Then what's your plan? What do you want to do about things? And we are sort of in this, the public in this crossfire, somewhat rhetorical fighting, like the Tories saying, so many slogans, rhetorics, and Starmer copying and paste it, almost tweak a little bit, then come up with it again. So I just feel like the public will come to a point and say, right, it's the time for me to find out what you actually standing for. And that's the time then the Labour Party need to step up and say, this is actually my principles, and this is what I really believe, and this is why I really don't believe. And I think, as I said previously, the fear to talk about anything that is trending sort of in the public, because however they talk, right or wrong, black or blue, black or white, or whatever color, there will be a backfire, and they fear for that. They keep being silent. And look at Keir Starmer being silent on the deputy chair of Conservative, Lee Anderson, saying "F back off to migrant," and he said nothing, literally quiet and silent. And I feel like he's deeply angry about it, and I feel like he really wants to come out and say something about it. But he says, if I do, I might lose the election. So for the self-interest, I won't do that.
In what sort of world would he lose an election criticising somebody who is racist?
It should have been, right? It's obvious, right? It's a straightforward thing. You should have say, there's nothing worse than allowing a racist to have a big platform and get away with it.
Yeah.
And him being silent, actually, it's not good. Being complicit sometimes, can be interpreted that you agree with, with the sentiment. So I hope he doesn't, and I believe he's not willing to agree with that. My fear is he compromised everything he has, like principle, values, and what Labour used to stand for, in pursuit of getting to power. And the deeper fear is whether when he gets to power, actually come back to his essence and Labour's essence, uh, or not. And if he's not, then I don't think we've changed a lot. I don't think we will be changing a lot by changing the torch to the Labour at this moment and with this current frequency.
Yeah. I mean, there is a notion that if you're very timid, which he is, I mean, he's quite happy to be timid. He doesn't want to rock the boat. He's saying, I'm not going to criticize anyone for what they say. I'm not going to comment on this, and that, and the next thing. It erodes people's trust over time. But even once you get into power, you're then held accountable for your manifesto. And if your manifesto is very weak, then it seems to me he would leave himself very much exposed to the right-wing press by trying to promote items that were not in his manifesto against their hostility, because then they will say things like, "These people are not to be trusted. You know, it's just not appropriate to let these people in, and we shouldn't do it."
Yeah, but he's already under influence of the right-wing media, and I
I
think
want to take a few questions there, if I may, Savan,
sure.
because I think we've set out the stall, as it were.
Yeah, of course.
It's been very helpful. Charles Smith is asking if you see any hope of Iraq becoming, as he puts it, politically stable.
I think after 2003, I was a child, right? I'd say a few bits about it. I thought when American troops and the British soldiers they came to Iraq, I thought, gosh, this is what we've been waiting for, and we will have stability back. We'll get rid of one dictator, and things will be better. And unfortunately, fortunately, we got rid of one dictator. But what we haven't done properly, we haven't put in place a system that's democratic, that's not tolerating corruption. In fact, we designed a system, I think, because of the invasion of Iraq. Iraq was so destabilized in a point politically and in security wise. It has the highest corruption, I believe, more than when Saddam Hussein was there.
Really?
Maybe, billions of pounds, millions of pounds has been stolen and been taken. I mean, at least before you would know who's the suspect, but now you literally don't know. There's lack of freedom of speech and lack of freedom of expression. The schools, universities, every single shop and business has been politicized in a way, even like primary 4 and primary 5, being politicized and like you're either going to be one party or another. And I don't see a hope for a very, very close future, but I'm hopeful. I hope to see Iraq change and be a livable place, per se.
I mean, it must be very difficult because Iraq is sandwiched between Iran and Iran is a theocracy, so it has the Revolutionary Guard. They take care of business. If you don't agree, then life is very difficult, and it's huge. I mean, you've got that right on your border now, your
I think
people
inside the border, John, they are operating in Iraq. They are heavily operating this. They are operating in Iraq, in Kurdistan, Iraq, and the even Turkish meat, which is the security agents, they are operating in Iraq as well. And we have Syria and the threat of ISIS and extremism. So Iraq is not the best place to live in or to at least do politics.
And I guess there's not too many options, because if Iraq can't fix itself, to use an expression, I suspect the last thing that anybody wants is for somebody to come in from outside and say, "Look, I'm here to help you," whoever that somebody is.
I think we've been there.
The reaction would be
We've been there, John. We had Paul Bremer, which after the invasion of Iraq, he supposedly come and became interim president, so until there's election and stuff like that. And once he left, he took 1.5 million pound. That's what was reported in Iraq at the time. 1.5 million pound and gone. And Iraq is the place, as I said about British institution, Iraq institutionally corrupt. Like even me and you, if you go and become a prime minister or president or whatever, there's there's a good chance for us to be corrupt as well, because everyone is corrupt around you, and there's so much opportunity, and there's so much resistance human can have, to millions of pounds, so much offer, and then you just end up in that rabbit hole.
Economically, how is it Iraq placed? I mean, where does its economically, where does its income come from? How is its GDP generated?
I think it's the main source of income in Iraq is the oil and gas. Obviously, we have the highest oil and gas. I think a little bit lower than Saudi Arabia. So we have the largest and the best type of oil as well in the world. And this is the main source. And we do import and export. We are not tech savvy, obviously. Iraq's not tech savvy. And we mainly rely on oil and gas. We do some agriculture a bit there and then, but mainly it's oil and gas.
But in order for the money to get out of Iraq, there must be some collusion with the banking system. I mean, you on the face of it, you would think that. I mean, we're always told that there are controls in the banking system. You can't take money that is not yours and transfer it to somewhere else without proof. We have compliance departments, heavens above, whose job it is, full-time job, 24/7, is to look at people like you and me and say, right, what is the provenance of these funds? How do we know that it's possible? Why should I permit these funds to be sent to your private account in the Virgin Islands? Clearly, there's collusion there.
That system theoretically is in place, but just recently, very interesting that you've spoken about that. It was a week or two ago. I think the Iraqi prime minister, who's really want to bring down corruption, opened a dossier that the US and the UK helped the previous, I think, prime minister to collect lots of money out of the banks, and so they were supporting the previous prime minister to do that. So there's a dossier opening, and there was another criminal caught that he threatened the banking staff in Iraq. He took out millions of pounds out of the central bank. So there's a huge issue. It's the corruption, it's the security, and it's the internal, external interference as well. So it's very hard to, because there's so many countries involved in Iraq, so many foreign interference, and you have Iran, you have Turkey, and it's very hard to navigate where to start.
Yeah. And I guess it's in Iraq's interest to forge links with Syria in order to get access to the Mediterranean. And even if that means that's anything that's prejudicial to Iraq, then presumably that's fine by them. So you're surrounded by all of this.
Absolutely. I mean, Turkey, Iran, even though of these bad interference, that you still have to keep your relationship with them and have to make deals sometimes with them. And it's very unfortunate, but you have to do it, otherwise you won't survive. And including Syria as well. Yes, it's in the interest of Iraq.
It's hard to see how that's going to change anytime soon, because as you describe it, there's so many vested interests who are feeding off Iraq right now.
Absolutely. It's like a sheep eaten by hundreds of wolves. You don't know how to save the sheep. The time you get to the sheep is not there. The bone is gone. There's so many wolves, hungry wolves on that sheep. So this is literally how I see it.
Yeah. Let's talk for a little bit about your future. If I was to ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time, Savan, what would you say?
Oh, that's a hard question. Well, I see myself. I've studied politics, economic philosophy. I've done it for the purpose to get into politics and be someone different, somewhat. I don't know what the power would does to me, and I don't know what the power would do to me as the time comes. But I really want to serve, be serve the community, and actually not just migrant community. When I say the community, I talk about working class community,
Yeah.
and altogether, this is what I want to be. Whether I will be there or not, I don't know. But this is what I'm aiming.
Well, it seems to me that the whole world is crying out for social justice. The whole world is crying out for some recognition of human rights at a time when so many of the large groupings, parties, countries are heading in the opposite direction, which is to say, look, we're not terribly fussed about the environment, we're certainly not fussed about human rights. Let's just try and make some money here as best we can. And it just strikes me that's frightfully sad, because anyone who's looked at the situation in terms of the environment can't help but conclude that things are not going in the right direction. Uh, so
Absolutely.
how do you appeal to people? I'm saying you, but I mean I'm talking about how do
Yeah,
people who are progressive appeal to people who are being told all the time that you shouldn't worry about the environment, you shouldn't worry about economics, leave us to do what we need to do here.
yeah. I mean, it's a very interesting point. I think uh, one of the things we need to understand is that it's just the very basic things. It's not too complicated. We live and breathe in oxygen and living on the nature, Mother Nature, and we owe to the Mother Nature. And I think that principle is to protecting it. And whether you look at it in terms of in a religious way, in a humanitarian way, just a human being without politics, we need to protect the environment in that way. And how am I appealing to people? I would say, uh, if you don't do if you don't do the right thing right now, it'll be too late to do anything later on. So I mean, you have to take action now. And
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no question. I mean, the latest research suggests that sea levels will almost certainly rise, and there's talk of even perhaps even 5 meters. And if you look across the world, I mean, 1 meter would be catastrophic for places like Bangladesh. 5 meters would be just beyond imagining, really. And yet, the UK government is saying, let's have some more licenses in the North Sea, and let's grab some more fossil fuels.
I literally thought the North Sea oil and gas would have run out in 2014 because that's what
Yeah, I
we've
remember that.
been
Yeah,
told. But I don't know. Miraculously, we have hundreds more licenses now. Maybe the oil grew back, but that's another thing. I think Rishi Sunak is at the side of, like, the Conservative Party is being funded by these gas and oil companies,
yeah,
these climate deniers, and they get donation from them, and of course they will sing and dance with the lyric and the song the donor wants to hear and listen. I don't
yeah,
think he cares. He literally cares about the environment. He doesn't, and why would he? And because he's a multimillionaire guy, he probably has his Love Island in his head
yeah,
when things go south, where to go and leave and stuff like that. Why would he care about my children's future and yours? He will be the least person to be affected. He's always in helicopter. He's not on the ground anyways. So he's so detached with the reality of the people living in, and there's no way you can bring this man back to reality, shake it off, and say, "Come on, man, this is the life we're living in. Like,
yeah,
what cuckoo planet you're living in?" And until we change the politics, it's all about politics, and it shouldn't be a politic. Environment should have been something everyone. It shouldn't be up for debate. We shouldn't
yeah,
even have a debate whether it would be good to protect the environment or not. That's such a low level of debate that people now forced to have now because of the Conservative. And my fear is the Labour has no alternative to the Conservative, and they saying we allowing any new gas and oil that has got the license now, they do not revoke any licenses. And this is like the Conservative do the job for them. And
Yeah.
they just take over and say, okay, do you know what, we carry on and we put the blame on the Tories. And at the same time, we don't do anything for the climate. So, yeah, I feel like it's the moral responsibility more than anything else. And we should do everything we can, especially as...
It's also not good news for Iraq because, as you said earlier, Iraq, there's so much money being generated from the oil fields. Now's the time to use that money to look at green alternatives instead of saying, "Oh, look, Iraq's full of oil. Let's just grab some more as best we can." It's a great disservice to the Iraqi people, it seems to me, if you take that head in the sand attitude and say, "Look," because what you're effectively saying is, "You guys have no future." That's what you're saying. We could
Definitely.
use them. Yeah.
Along with not having future, we don't have future plan as well, how to transition from get away from using fossil fuel and oil and gas to renewables. We don't have that plan in Iraq in place. We have hydropower. We have those, but they're very tiny minority. The majority of, for example, electricity and energy is relying on oil and gas. And I think what else we can do, we can at least educate other countries that heavily, they economic heavily relying on oil and gas industry like Iraq, and to help them out how to transition. But of course, the irony is, if you don't follow yourself, why would another country follow? So, I mean, we have to set an example, and I hope that's a good example. And hopefully, we will set a good example. In Scotland, at least we can do that because we're really good at renewable, and which is, makes sense. It's good for our economy and the environment at the same time.
Exactly. I sometimes feel sorry for people like Greta Thunberg, who goes out there and tries to, change minds, challenge attitudes. And she went through a period where she was making quite a big impact, and now it seems to have gone completely against her. The forces of reaction have moved in. They're now saying, "Look, she's this, that, the next thing," and sometimes she uses fossil fuels for this, and she doesn't take, whatever. It's that little sort of nitpicking. In other words, here's the size of the problem, but here's somebody trying to do something about it, and they're making that sort of mistake or whatever. Let's concentrate on that and not the big picture.
It's a dirty trick you use in football, that you hit the player, not the ball. So you go for the player than the ball. I mean, the ball is the environment and the claim that she makes. Whoever she is and whatever she's doing, her claims are objectively right and true, and that's unobjectable. So when you have a true claim, whether you make it, I make it, Rishi Sunak make it, it's a true claim regardless. So she's making the right claim, and it's good for everyone. It's not beneficial for her. I don't think she's making out any money out of these things, and in fact, she doesn't. She lives on the school. She get paid from, like in Sweden, you receive some, like, it's equivalent to benefit for students that studying in education. Very little. That's what she literally lives on. So I don't know, like, why people attack the player and leave the ball to go and
For me, it's slightly more obvious. I think what happens is that you the sort of interested parties who want her to fail. I think they want the actual idea to fail, and they've done the research, and the research shows that because she's seen to be symbolic of that move towards transition and change, if they can destroy her, then effectively they've taken away the opposition. Effectively, it's a bit like saying we're playing a football team, to take you from your analogy, and they've got one great player. So what we're going to do now is we're not going to forget the ball. What we're going to do is just injure that player, and then we win. And you think it just sounds so cynical, frankly.
It might work in a short run, right? Imagine it might work in a short run. They might take Greta down, and we might have an area that nobody talks about environment. But that doesn't mean the environment is not getting worse. And that doesn't mean because there's no debate, the environment will get better by itself.
Yeah.
And sooner or later, people will evident it through their eyes. They can see the floods. We can see it. Like
Yeah.
we've seen the flood, we've seen, the wildfire and all of these things. I know some climate deniers say, it's always been there and all of the nonsense that they say. But when it comes to our door, like our door, when the flood hits our home, and when our kids are struggle, to cross one road to another, and when the wildfire is back in our back garden, then we say, "Oh, do you know what? We got it wrong," and it will be too late. It will be too late to change anything at that time. But I mean, yeah, some of the climate deniers are they prefer short-term pleasure and long-term pain, which is a very stupid idea to me. Instead of like saying, "Oh, let's spread the pleasure out. We can still use gas and oil, but transition to a greener energy, and have a positive debate about it."
Isn't the difficulty with that? I mean, that sounds very sane, responsible, articulate, convincing. But we don't have that sort of world. What we've got is that oligarchs who effectively run large portions of this earth. And their attitude is, well, this is just a cost of doing business. And they've already secured the places they want to go to as refugees. They'll have a refuge somewhere, they'll have a place somewhere else up in I don't know where. But they've already picked out the places where they're going to flee to when things get very bad. And they don't have to suffer the consequences of their own behavior. Because that's what history tells us. If you let people accumulate too much power, then they, as we discussed at the beginning, they abuse it. And this is one of I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. Let's put it that way.
I wouldn't be surprised either. I think it's inevitable. They know it. It's a very basic science. If you pollute the environment, and if you pollute it too much, it will be a time that the environment cannot handle it anymore. So it's a very simple. Like you don't need to be a scientist to know that. And of course, and those who are benefiting from making our environment polluted and making it unlivable, they know what they're doing. About, like you say, they have the backup plan. Otherwise, or they don't have a backup plan, but they just think about themselves. They say, well, at least it will be good for me when I live another 30, 40 years. I don't care about my children. They might not care about their children. And some actually don't. We might not believe it. We might, see people with the way we see ourselves to our children. I would never, like, if there's an option between me and my children who should leave, I would take out my kidney, all of organs. I'll give it out to my kid happily.
Yeah.
So of course I think about the future of my kid. You do too, and this is not a unique thing. Every normal parent would do that, but I don't think they might not have that, or they might have a backup plan. So
I suspect that there's a mixture of both there. I think some of them are just egomaniacs and care only for themselves. But I suspect there's a whole bunch of them who've said, oh, well, no, I'm interested in the future. I don't attach much future to the human race, but I think the elite should look after themselves. And this is what I plan to do. And they'll head for some place, God knows where, and hope and pray that the worst effects of climate change don't affect them. I think they're wrong if that's what they believe, because I believe some of the changes that are underway will affect everyone, either sooner or later. And I think that's incontrovertible. And I hope I'm wrong, by the way. I do hope I'm wrong. But the facts suggest otherwise. And the question then is, what should the rest of us do while they're busy messing up?
I think that's you're absolutely right. I think what we can do is just to raise awareness and let people know and be open and honest about to say this what's going to happen. And if you want to take it, if you want to agree with it, if you want to, have nothing to do with it, absolutely fine. But the environment will have something to do with you. Yeah. You can't ignore the environment. They don't ignore you. They will come and haunt you at one point. And one of the things is there. I think, yeah, some people would say the climate disaster will not discriminate. It hits you and they don't care where you're from. And But I think, yeah, it might be us tomorrow. It might be us. It definitely might be us. There's no promise that tomorrow will be as safe as today. No one can give us that promise. And
Aren't you worried, uh, Savan, that as people have to respond to climate change, I think you and I both agree that it's going to happen and it's going to be impactful right across the board. As people find themselves in that invidious position of having to somehow uh, rectify these problems that have occurred, particularly for the sake of their children, that will lead to enormous political unrest.
absolutely, one that, and but the other point will be soon we'll have climate migrants. So many will be, fleeing their home because there's unlivable, and because we are responsible for it morally as
Yeah.
industrial revolution and all of that. We are the main polluters, and we cannot change the book, the history book. We've done it, and they were looking at us, and there will be people needing us, and they will be coming on our shores by thousands. This is not the way Suella Brahman say people will come in by millions. I'm not trying to say that. I'm trying to say there will be 1,000 of people will be facing disasters, and definitely will be trying to find another way to live. And the political unrest would be uh, enormous, and at some point the damage will be irreversible and irreparable. And it's not just going to impact the countries that doesn't have anything to do with us. The internal political situation here will be worse as well, because soon people realize they've been lied to, and they will have a reaction and say, "Why did you take my children's future away? Why did you do that? And why did you tell me everything would be okay? Why did you, took a side of those who making billions while I was working class? I was going to work. I didn't want to do politics. I didn't want to study environment. I just thought I'd seen a man in a suit and I trust you and I believed whatever comes out in your mouth is true. And I put my trust in you and see what you've done to my children." And I think those times will come, and the history will judge every individual differently. And I hope we're on the right side of history. All we
Yeah.
can do.
I think you're right. I think it'll be particularly difficult for the UK because back in 1948, the Parliament agreed the Nationality Act, which effectively said that um, six, sort of 16, I think it was 1.6 billion people had the right to come to the UK because effectively what the legislation did was to say to everyone in the Commonwealth and all the colonies, you are a British citizen by right, which means that, well, presently the population of India is almost a billion. So, so, so
That would
I
have been a
mean,
lot number.
yeah. And of course, many Indian people will say, well, I want to come to the UK because the way they put it is very straightforward. They say, we are here because you were there.
That's so true. I mean, there's so much story about that. So it says we were doing our things, we were practicing our culture, and we speaking our language. All of a sudden, you came up in our shore with your. I don't think they had small boats when they colonized India and other countries. I think it was bigger, long ship. You could say
Well,
so.
it was the East India Company that did it. It was a private enterprise that conquered India. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, they were like, we were doing our things, and you just turn up to our show. You say, then you're not allowed to speak Indian anymore. You have to speak English, and look how great we are, and we have to teach you how to govern. And I know the irony is now they can't even govern themselves in the UK, and perhaps we need some help from outside world. But absolutely, you were there. You were there first,
Yeah.
and you took what is belonged to them, and they might not come back to say, "Oh, give us back," but at least they say, have the courtesy. We gave you all we had. Just let us sleep, somewhere and have a normal life. We don't want to loot you. We don't want to take the treasures, but we just want to live like a normal human being.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that deal will be on the cards. I think if India ever decided, because India will soon have a greater population than China, if that isn't already the case, and it will be a powerhouse, I imagine. So it's hard to avoid it being otherwise, and its leadership might not be the way that the British would prefer it to be, and they may take a very different view of the history of the British in India than the British do,
True.
because the British view of the empire, which I tried to cover in my column last week, is very different to reality. I mean, what people learn at schools in the UK about the British Empire would make most people who have experienced the British Empire disagree. Because I mean, very few people in the UK know that the British set up the first concentration camps in South Africa during the Boer War. Um, uh, and the only person who actually thought that was a marvelous idea was, of course, in Germany. So it's it's. I think it's important to be honest about what you've done in order to deal with the world. I think if you try to pretend that you were some sort of benign influence, but you managed to acquire this huge empire almost accidentally.
I mean, it can work, if you talk about it with your closest friend that they don't want to say, "Oh, come on, get back to it, get real." But it doesn't work in the real world because, like, literally everybody knows the truth. I mean, you can't bury your head in under the sand, one can say, and of course, and yeah, it's about the accountability, right? I've done something wrong. I'll take the responsibility, and this is part of. Uh, I don't think we ever had word apology for
No,
what has been done.
no.
So
Well, I think Charles went to Barbados and said slavery was wrong. He didn't say my family benefited enormously and I want to compensate you for that. He didn't go that far, though that was the reality.
he said something that everybody knows. Slavery
Well,
was wrong.
yeah, it was a
Right.
platitude. And it's seen by the people who listen to it as a platitude, because Barbados has now become sovereign, I think, or plans to be sovereign. But I mean, it didn't have the desired effect. The desired effect was to continue to keep the Commonwealth together.
Hmm.
We've almost run out of time. So
It's
this has
interesting.
been
Like,
this has
yeah,
been
absolutely.
I want to mention, and maybe you'd like to add a comment or two to this, that you're planning to have a show on Indie Live. Is that the case?
Yes, that's true. So soon, I can't say when, but soon, very soon, we will have a show
Good.
called More Than Just. It will be here on Independence Live, and it'll be hosted by me. And we will have many amazing guests. John
Good.
is one of them, and that time I'll be hosting, and you'll be my guest. So
Well, I'd be happy to appear on your show.
you'll
I'd be honoured, in fact. So there we are, folks. Look out for Savan's show when it appears. It's called More Than Just. It sounds like a really good title to me, and these titles are important. You've got to get people's attention, and More Than Just sounds perfect to me.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you very much, Savan. I'm going to make a few concluding remarks. If you'd like to stay online after the broadcast is finished, that would be great.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you.
So, a big thank you to Savan, and a big thank you to all of you for joining us tonight, and thanks for your questions. I just want to say in conclusion, look out for Elliot Bulmer's column in the Sunday National this weekend. Elliot's stuff, I mean, you all know, but let me repeat it, if I may. He is the foremost constitutional expert in the whole island. In fact, he's so good that he works with other countries, helping them to develop their constitutions. And I mean, it seems to me that if you're going to talk about constitutions, you're going to talk about statehood. If you're going to talk about institutions and you're going to talk about morality and politics, then Elliot's your man. He's in the Sunday National in the 7 Days section every fortnight. Don't miss it. Go straight for his article. I'll post it on Twitter as well. Well, the TNT show is back next week with another amazing guest, Stuart Donald, who'll be talking to us about his research, and it's absolutely fascinating. So without any more ado, let me say thank you again for being with us. Stay safe, take care, look after each other. Good night.
Okay.